What if I told you stupidity isn't just a lack of intelligence, but a hidden virus in the human mind? Not just passive ignorance, but an active, corrosive force, one that can twist logic, poison kindness, and hijack even the brightest minds. The real danger to our world might not be wicked people doing wicked things, but decent people who've simply stopped questioning. Picture this. A brilliant scientist, once hailed for innovation, suddenly starts pushing bizarre conspiracies. A beloved teacher slowly embraces beliefs that hurt the very students they swore to protect. A caring parent begins making choices that put their children in harm's way. These aren't villains, they're everyday people. People like us, caught in something philosopher Dietrich Bonhoeffer described as the silent power of stupidity. And here's the part that stings. It's not rare, it's not remote, it's happening right now, all around us. This isn't just a theory, it's been tested. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran a disturbing experiment. At Yale, regular volunteers were asked to give what they believed were painful electric shocks to strangers simply because someone in a lab coat told them to. Even when the victims screamed, begged, or fell silent, most people kept going. Why? Because they stopped thinking for themselves. That's what Bonhoeffer saw with his own eyes in Nazi Germany, and what led him to one of the most uncomfortable truths about human nature. But before we go deeper, have you ever nodded along with something just because the crowd around you did? Hold that thought. Bonhoeffer wasn't just a thinker, he was a witness. A German pastor who watched an educated religious society fall under the spell of totalitarianism. He came from a family of doctors, professors, intellectuals. He believed in reason, debate, morality, but he watched those very people, his peers, cheer for cruelty. Not out of hate, but out of habit. Not because they were brainwashed, but because they had quietly stopped thinking. From prison, in 1943, awaiting death for resisting Hitler, Bonhoeffer wrote a chilling line. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Arguments don't work, force doesn't work, truth doesn't even register. Why? Because stupidity isn't self-aware. Unlike evil, which knows it's wrong, stupidity feels noble. It doesn't resist correction, it ignores it. Worse, it works perfectly for those in power. Evil needs to hide, but stupidity, it wears a smile. It thinks it's helping. It believes it's moral, that makes it unstoppable. Bonhoeffer wasn't warning about dumb people. He was describing a system where intelligent minds are discouraged from critical thinking, where slogans replace truth, where conversation feels like shouting into an echo. He called it a kind of functional stupidity, not born from lack of knowledge, but from pressure, fear, laziness, comfort. Our society doesn't need to censor you. It just needs to keep you distracted, overwhelmed, entertained, until you stop thinking for yourself. And guess what? That system is winning. Here's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer realized. Something so disturbing, so counterintuitive, that most people still refuse to accept it. The greatest threat to any society isn't evil. It's stupidity. Yes, you heard that right. Not hatred, not greed, not violence, but the quiet, compliant, confident face of ignorance when it believes it's doing the right thing. Evil, Bonhoeffer said, always carries within it a sense of shame. Even the worst criminals often know they're doing something wrong. There's guilt, there's a limit, there's a line they know they're crossing. But stupidity walks right past that line smiling. Because stupid people, Bonhoeffer wrote, don't act out of malice, they act out of conviction. They don't see themselves as the problem, they see themselves as the solution, and that is what makes them unstoppable. You can argue with evil, you can expose it, fight it, condemn it, but try reasoning with someone who believes their ignorance is virtue, and you'll be speaking into a void, as Bonhoeffer wrote from prison. When one deals with a stupid person, one feels that one is not dealing with a person at all, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like which have taken possession of him. Let that sink in. You're no longer speaking to a mind, you're speaking to a system, a loop, an echo. Because stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's definition, isn't just a lack of knowledge, it's a surrender of thought. It's when a person stops thinking for themselves and becomes a relay station repeating whatever they've been fed with no curiosity, no self-awareness, no pause. And here's the kicker. This form of stupidity isn't random, it's strategic. Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity flourishes exactly when power wants it to. Because stupid people are easy to control, they're easy to manipulate. They don't ask questions, they don't resist, they don't reflect, they obey. Not because they're afraid, but because they think they're right. And that makes them more useful than the cruelest dictator, because they enforce the rules without even knowing who wrote them. Think about it. You don't need to burn books if people have already stopped reading. You don't need to censor the truth if people have stopped caring about truth altogether. That's the nightmare Bonhoeffer saw forming not a nation of monsters, but a nation of minds switched off. And the most terrifying part? Most of them never realized it was happening. They didn't wake up one morning and decide to become blind. They simply chose convenience. They chose repetition. They chose comfort. And stupidity, as Bonhoeffer wrote, took over not like a lightning strike, but like a fog, quiet, slow, suffocating. Stupidity, Bonhoeffer warned, isn't just an individual flaw, it's a collective infection. It doesn't spread through genetics or chance. It spreads through systems, institutions, and most dangerously, groups. You see, we often imagine stupid people as loners, isolated, detached, sitting quietly in the corner while the smart ones run the world. But Bonhoeffer flipped that idea upside down. He observed something far more chilling. People don't become stupid in isolation. They become stupid when they join the group. He wrote, "Stupidity is not an intellectual defect, but a human one. It is not in solitude that stupidity becomes dangerous, but in community." Let that sink in. Stupidity isn't born in darkness. It's manufactured in the light when people gather, conform, and stop thinking independently. It's in the staff meeting where everyone nods even when they disagree. It's in the social media thread where no one dares to question the popular opinion. It's in the political rally where facts become irrelevant and slogans become sacred. Bonhoeffer saw this firsthand in Nazi Germany. People who were kind, thoughtful, and intelligent in private transformed into parrots of propaganda when surrounded by others. Why? Because group dynamics shift the way we think, or rather, the way we don't think. When we're in a group, we don't want to be the odd one out. We don't want to risk rejection, criticism, or conflict, so we begin to nod along. We stay silent, and eventually, we start to believe the very thing we once questioned. It's not that we lose our intelligence, we lock it away to survive. Modern psychology would later prove Bonhoeffer right. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that became legendary. Participants were asked to judge line lengths, a simple task, but they were placed in a group of actors who all gave obviously wrong answers. And guess what? 75% of participants conformed at least once, knowingly giving a wrong answer just to fit in. They didn't do it because they were dumb, they did it because they were afraid to think alone. That's the horrifying truth Bonhoeffer captured decades earlier. In groups, we exchange our minds for safety. Now, fast forward to today, think about how this plays out in our hyper-connected world. Our groups aren't just physical anymore, they're digital, algorithmic, and invisible. Social media doesn't connect people, it clusters them. Algorithms detect your preferences and then surround you with others who think exactly like you. At first, it feels good, you feel seen, understood, supported, but over time, something happens. Doubt becomes rare. Nuance becomes suspicious, and thinking differently becomes dangerous. Soon, stupidity isn't just a possibility, it's the default. Why? Because the system rewards emotional certainty over intellectual complexity. A well-researched post gets ignored, a sensational, fact-free rant goes viral. The smartest comment gets buried, the loudest one gets shared. And the result? We live in a world where being confidently wrong is more valuable than being humbly right. Bonhoeffer understood this mechanism long before likes and retweets existed. He saw how entire populations could be lulled into passivity not through violence, but through participation in systems that discouraged critical thought. This is why he wrote, "The power of the one needs the stupidity of the many." Because a regime or a corporation or an ideology doesn't need to convince people to be evil. It only needs to convince them not to think. Once that happens, The machine runs itself. Teachers stop challenging students, journalists stop asking questions, citizens stop holding leaders accountable, and little by little, a civilization begins to rot, not with fire and blood, but with applause. Here's the most terrifying part. Most of the people caught in this system don't know they're stupid. They go to work, they raise children, they make moral decisions, and all the while, they think they're being good. Bonhoeffer warned that this kind of stupidity is immune to logic because the stupid person doesn't process arguments, they repeat positions, they don't evaluate evidence, and they don't feel guilt because they believe deep down that they're doing the right thing. That's why you can't reach them. You're not talking to a person anymore, you're talking to a program. But here's what makes it even worse. Stupidity protects itself. Try challenging it and you'll be met with mockery. Try offering facts and you'll be labeled elitist. Try suggesting doubt and you'll be told you're dangerous. In a society where stupidity has become a social force, truth is not suppressed by force, it's drowned by noise. And so we have to ask, are we still a thinking society, or are we slowly becoming a comfortable one, drugged by distraction, numbed by convenience, and ruled by our own apathy? Because Bonhoeffer wasn't issuing a warning for his time. He was writing a prophecy for ours. A world where stupidity isn't punished, but promoted. Not by evil men, but by ordinary people who simply stopped thinking for themselves. When the world is calm, truth has a chance to breathe. But in times of crisis, truth suffocates. Bonhoeffer understood something most people miss. Stupidity doesn't randomly appear, it blossoms in the soil of fear. Whenever society enters a moment of panic, whether through war, economic collapse, political upheaval, or cultural chaos, something shifts deep inside the human psyche. The rational mind takes a step back. The tribal mind steps forward. People stop analyzing, they start reacting. They stop asking questions, they start looking for enemies. And that's exactly when stupidity becomes not just common, but contagious. Picture a society in crisis. Inflation is rising, jobs are disappearing, people are scared, angry, and desperate. They want answers, but they don't have time to read 600-page books or decode complex truths. They need something fast, something simple, something that tells them, you're right, and they're wrong. This is where stupidity steps in, not as an accident, but as a survival strategy. Bonhoeffer saw it unfold during the rise of Nazi Germany. A humiliated nation drowning in economic despair and national shame found itself turning toward a man who offered not reason, but rage. He didn't offer subtlety. He offered slogans. He didn't challenge people to think. He told them who to blame. And suddenly, millions of intelligent people started behaving like they couldn't think at all. Why? Because in a moment of crisis, certainty feels safer than truth. Stupidity thrives because it gives people what they crave most in chaos. Comfort. Comfort in being part of a group. Comfort in blaming someone else. Comfort in not having to think too hard. In psychology, there's a well-known phenomenon called cognitive load. When people are stressed, their brains can't process as much information. We become impatient, impulsive, and more prone to black and white thinking. Nuance becomes the enemy. Subtlety becomes exhausting. And complexity. It feels like a threat. This is when stupidity evolves from individual ignorance to a cultural force. People no longer say, I don't know. They say, I don't need to know. They don't doubt themselves. They double down. They don't explore ideas, they demand certainty. And in this panic-driven clarity, truth is lost, not because it was defeated, but because it was forgotten. Bonhoeffer wrote something terrifying. Against stupidity, we have no defense. Neither protest nor force can touch it. Reasoning is useless. Why? Because the stupid person isn't aware of their ignorance. They feel morally elevated by it. They think they are protecting truth, defending virtue, saving the world, but in reality, they've become the very thing destroying it. And during a crisis, that sense of moral certainty becomes turbocharged. The more pain people feel, the more tightly they cling to simplicity. They don't want difficult truths. They want a target, they want someone to blame, a group to hate, a reason to feel righteous while everything else burns. Bonhoeffer saw this firsthand. The same German intellectuals who once debated Kant and Goethe began cheering for book burnings. Teachers who once taught critical thinking began preaching racial superiority. Pastors who once spoke of love and grace began praising authoritarian power. They weren't brainwashed overnight. They were frightened into stupidity. Here's where it gets even darker. Those in power know that panic breeds stupidity, and they use it. Bonhoeffer warned that stupidity is not just a symptom of chaos, it is often engineered. When leaders want control, they don't need to tell people what to think. They just need to make thinking feel impossible. Disorient them, overwhelm them, flood them with contradictions and outrage. Eventually, the average person gives up and says, "Just tell me what to believe." And that's when control is complete. The dictator doesn't need to ban books. He just needs to convince people they're dangerous. The corporation doesn't need to censor truth. It just needs to make lies feel more comforting. The propaganda machine doesn't need to persuade, it only needs to exhaust. Once people are emotionally worn out, they'll trade. Curiosity for convenience and silence. Every voice that threatens that illusion. Stupidity, Bonhoeffer realized, is not random. It becomes functional in crisis. It has a role. It keeps the machine running. It makes the gears of power turn smoothly without resistance. The less people think, the less they question. The less they question, the more efficiently they can be used. Used to vote, used to buy, used to punish, used to obey. That's the terrifying efficiency of stupidity. It turns free people into willing tools, not through fear alone, but through a hollow kind of faith. Faith in authority, faith in simplicity, faith in slogans that require no thinking. Bonhoeffer didn't just diagnose society, he diagnosed the soul. He understood that crisis doesn't just destroy nations, it destroys individuals from the inside out. First, it replaces curiosity with fear. Then, it replaces thought with belief. Finally, it replaces responsibility with obedience. By the time the dust settles, people aren't just victims of crisis, they've become products of it. And most horrifying of all, they believe they did the right thing. So, ask yourself, have you ever been so afraid, so overwhelmed that you stopped thinking and just followed? Have you ever repeated something you didn't understand just because it felt safer than questioning it? We all have. That's why Bonhoeffer's theory isn't about them, it's about us. It's a mirror we're terrified to look into, because stupidity isn't always loud, violent, or ridiculous. Sometimes it looks exactly like you, when you stop thinking for yourself. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was clear about one thing. You can't fight stupidity with intelligence alone, because stupidity, as he saw it, isn't just the absence of knowledge, it's the absence of will. The will to think, the will to doubt, the will to be alone in your judgment. So how do you resist something that's everywhere, yet invisible? How do you push back when stupidity is not outside you, but already whispering inside? The answer isn't easy, but it begins with something radical. You must choose courage over comfort. Bonhoeffer believed that true thinking begins in silence, not the silence of passivity, but the silence where you separate your mind from the crowd and face your thoughts without noise. Solitude isn't just being alone. It's being free from the demand to agree, to conform, to perform, and it's terrifying. Because when you strip away the world's opinions, you're left with only one voice, your own. And most people haven't heard theirs in years. But if you want to escape the pull of groupthink, this is where the rebellion begins. In solitude, you relearn how to ask uncomfortable questions. Do I really believe this? Am I just repeating what I heard? What if I'm wrong? These questions won't win you applause, but they will give you something better. Clarity. Refuse to speak. What you don't understand, though one of Bonhoeffer's unspoken commandments, was this: do not say what you do not grasp. We live in a culture that pressures us to have an opinion on everything instantly. But every time you pretend to know what you don't, every time you echo a phrase just to belong, you give stupidity more ground. Refuse to play that game. If you don't know something, admit it. If you're unsure, say so. If the truth is complicated, defend it anyway. Because resistance doesn't always look like shouting in the streets. Sometimes it's the quiet discipline of not lying. Step 3. Cultivate the courage to be unpopular. The reason stupidity spreads isn't just because people are uninformed, it's because they're afraid of being excluded. Bonhoeffer saw that good people often knew what was right, but said nothing because they didn't want to suffer the consequences. They were afraid of losing friends, jobs, status, even their lives, but he also knew this: silence in the face of evil is itself evil. To resist stupidity, you must be willing to lose comfort, lose applause, lose the illusion of safety. Because the cost of cowardice is always greater, even if it takes years to see. Step 4. Strengthen conscience over compliance. Bonhoeffer warned that systems of stupidity survive because individuals stop trusting their moral instincts. They stop asking, "Is this right?" and instead ask, "Is this allowed?" When you reduce morality to legality or popularity, stupidity thrives, because now people no longer seek truth, they seek permission. To resist this, you must strengthen your conscience like a muscle. You must learn to feel the weight of your own decisions, not just follow rules, but ask why those rules exist. And when that inner voice, however faint, tells you something's wrong, listen, even if you're the only one who does. Step 5. Educate with humility, not arrogance. Here's the trap many fall into. They discover truth and then weaponize it. But Bonhoeffer knew that arrogance only strengthens stupidity. If you humiliate someone for being wrong, you don't inspire thought, you trigger defensiveness. The goal is not to win arguments, it's to reignite thinking,